The morning sun kissed the parched lands of Copper Canyon as Rachel Lawson stared at the empty chair where her husband had sat just hours before, the crushing weight of abandonment settling on her shoulders like a yoke. Her 6-month-old daughter, Lily, slept peacefully in the wooden cradle beside her, unaware that her father had gambled away their last dollar and disappeared into the dawn with nothing but a hastily scrawled note. Found a big game in Tucson, better this way. The year was 1878, and in the Arizona territory, a woman alone with a child had few options and fewer friends. Rachel's hands trembled as she folded the note and tucked it into her apron pocket. The tiny one-room cabin that had been their home for the past year now felt like a prison. Thomas had left nothing, not money, not food, not even the decency of a proper goodbye, just the crushing silence and the gentle breathing of their daughter. "We'll be fine," she whispered to Lily, though her voice cracked with uncertainty. "We have to be." The pantry held barely enough food for 3 days. The rent on the cabin would be due in a week. Rachel had sewn dresses for some of the women in town, but the money had always gone straight into Thomas's pocket, and now into whatever card game had lured him away from his responsibilities. Rachel spent that day in a fog, mechanically caring for Lily while trying to formulate a plan. By nightfall, she'd made a decision. They couldn't stay in the cabin. Come morning, she would pack their meager belongings and head into town to seek work at the hotel, or perhaps the general store. Someone would need a laundress, a cook, or a cleaning woman. She was young, just 23, and strong enough for hard work. When morning came, Rachel dressed Lily in her best gown, a tiny cotton affair with embroidered flowers that Rachel had lovingly stitched during her pregnancy. She wrapped her own best shawl around her shoulders and tucked the last of their possessions into a worn carpet bag. With Lily secured to her chest with strips of fabric, she closed the cabin door behind her without looking back. The walk into Copper Canyon proper was 3 miles of dusty road that shimmered in the early heat. Rachel's throat was parched by the time the first buildings came into view, and Lily had begun to fuss against her chest. "Hush now, sweet girl," Rachel murmured, bouncing slightly as she walked. "We're almost there." Copper Canyon had sprung up around the promise of ore in the surrounding hills. It wasn't a large town, perhaps 50 buildings in all, dominated by the 3-story Grand Hotel, the general store, the assayer's office, and the Silver Spur Saloon. It was to this last building that Thomas had disappeared nearly every night, trading their future for the fleeting thrill of the cards. Rachel stood in the middle of the main street, uncertainty momentarily paralyzing her. The hotel seemed the most promising place to start. She shifted Lily in her arms and was about to cross the street when a commotion near the livery stable caught her attention. A dusty cowboy on horseback was arguing with the stable master, their voices carrying in the morning air. The cowboy's stallion pranced nervously, powerful and coal-black against the pale dust, while the stable master shook his head emphatically. $10 to stable him for a week, and not a penny less," the stable master insisted. "That's a valuable animal, and you know it." "Highway robbery," the cowboy growled, but reached into his pocket nonetheless. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his hat, but Rachel could see the sharp angle of his jaw, tanned and weather-beaten. She averted her eyes and continued toward the hotel, suddenly self-conscious of her dusty appearance and the obviousness of her situation. A woman, alone with a baby, carrying all her worldly possessions in a single bag, anyone could read her desperation. The hotel lobby was cool and dim after the brightness outside. Behind the front desk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up at her entrance. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, his eyes taking in her appearance with a quick, assessing glance. "I'm looking for work," Rachel said, striving to keep her voice steady. "Cleaning, cooking, laundry, anything you might need." The man's expression softened slightly with pity, which was almost worse than outright rejection. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lawson, Rachel Lawson." "Mrs. Lawson, we don't have any positions available at present. Perhaps you might try the general store. Mrs. Peterson sometimes needs help with inventory." Rachel nodded, thanked him, and turned to leave, fighting against the tightness in her throat. Outside, the sun seemed even brighter, more merciless. The general store yielded the same result, as did the dressmaker's shop and the small restaurant next to the assayer's office. By midday, Lily was crying in earnest, hungry and hot, and Rachel was fighting back tears of her own. She sat on a bench outside the general store, unbuttoning her bodice just enough to allow Lily to nurse, using her shawl for modesty. "Pardon me, madam," a deep voice said from above her, "but you look like you could use some water." Rachel looked up, startled, to find the cowboy from the livery standing before her. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps late 20s, with eyes the color of the sky after a storm and a straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once. He was holding out a tin cup of water. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the cup with her free hand. "Name's Kieran Quinn," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Just rode in from Tucson way." The mention of Tucson made Rachel stiffen. "Did you now?" she asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Have a good time at the tables there?" Kieran's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Not much for gambling, madam. Was delivering a string of horses to a ranch outside town." He studied her face for a moment. "Someone you know lose big in Tucson?" Rachel looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep at her breast, milk-drunk and peaceful. "My husband," she said simply. "Left yesterday. Said there was a big game." Understanding dawned in Kieran's eyes, followed by something harder to read. "Left you and the little one behind, did he?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Kieran's jaw tightened. He was silent for a long moment, then squatted down to be at eye level with her. "Your man, he play at the Silver Nugget in Tucson?" "I don't know. He just left a note saying he was heading there for a game." "The Silver Nugget's the biggest gambling hall in Tucson. If he was heading for a big game, that's likely where he'd go." Kieran scratched his chin thoughtfully. "And let me guess he took all your money with him?" Rachel's flush of shame was answer enough. Kieran stood, looking down the street toward the saloon, then back at Rachel. "Mrs. Lawson, Rachel Lawson." "Mrs. Lawson, I don't mean to pry, but do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" The question brought fresh tears to her eyes, which she blinked away furiously. "I'll figure something out," she said, with more confidence than she felt. Kieran nodded slowly, seeming to come to a decision. "I've got business in town for a few days. My camp's just outside, near the creek. It's not much, but there's fresh water and shade. You and the little one are welcome to it while I'm here." Rachel looked up at him, suspicious. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, softening his rugged features. "Because my ma would tan my hide if she knew I'd left a woman and baby without shelter." His expression turned more serious. "And because I've seen what happens to folks down on their luck in towns like this. It ain't pretty, especially for a young woman." Rachel considered his offer. She had no reason to trust this stranger, but her options were dwindling with each passing hour. The alternative was begging for charity at the church or sleeping rough. "Your husband," Kieran said, breaking into her thoughts. "He's the gambling type, I take it. Been at it a while?" "Since before we were married," Rachel admitted. "He promised to quit when Lily was born, but—" "Men like that don't change easy," Kieran said, not unkindly. "You'll have better luck with me than waiting on him to come to his senses." The bluntness of his statement should have offended her, but instead, Rachel felt something akin to relief. Here, at least, was honesty. "I'll accept your offer of the camp for tonight," she said finally, "but I'll be looking for work in the morning." Kieran nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Fair enough. I've got some business at the saloon to attend to first. Mind waiting here? Won't be more than half an hour." Rachel agreed and watched as Kieran strode purposefully toward the Silver Spur. True to his word, he emerged less than 30 minutes later, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Ready?" he asked, extending a hand to help her up from the bench. With Lily securely in one arm and her carpet bag in the other, Rachel followed Kieran through town and out along a narrow trail that led to a copse of cottonwood trees, alongside a small creek. His camp was simple but well organized, a small tent, a fire pit ringed with stones, and his saddle and gear neatly stacked under a canvas tarp. "It's not much," Kieran said, suddenly seeming a bit embarrassed, "but the tent's clean and the creek water's good for drinking upstream of town." "It's more than we had an hour ago," Rachel said softly. "Thank you." As the afternoon wore on, Kieran proved to be a surprisingly considerate host. He built up the fire, offered Rachel the use of his tent, and produced a small pot of beans and bacon from his saddlebag, which he heated over the flames. "You never said the little one's name," he remarked as they ate. "Lily," Rachel said, glancing at her daughter, who was sleeping on a blanket Kieran had spread near the fire. "She's 6 months old." "She's a beauty," Kieran said with genuine admiration. "Takes after her mama, I'd wager." Rachel felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. It had been a long time since Thomas had said anything kind about her appearance. In the last few months of their marriage, he'd barely looked at her at all, his eyes always drawn to the cards or the bottom of a whiskey glass. "Were you really in Tucson?" she asked, changing the subject. Did you happen to see anyone matching Thomas's description? He's tall, dark hair, has a scar above his right eye." Kieran shook his head. "Can't say I noticed anyone like that, but Tucson's a fair-sized place, and I wasn't exactly looking." Rachel nodded, trying not to let her disappointment show. She wasn't sure why she was even asking. Thomas had made his choice. "What took you to the saloon earlier?" she asked, curious despite herself. A shadow passed over Kieran's face. "Was asking about your husband, actually. Thought maybe someone there might know where he was heading, or if he'd mentioned the game in Tucson before leaving." Rachel stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Kieran shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "Figured you might want to know." "And did they? Know anything, I mean?" "Bartender remembers him well enough. Said he lost heavy 2 nights ago to a fellow passing through. A professional gambler name of Slater." Kieran hesitated. "They said Thomas was talking big about winning it all back in Tucson, where Slater was headed next." Rachel absorbed this information silently. It aligned with what Thomas had written in his note. "Thank you for asking," she said finally. "Not that it changes anything." As darkness fell, Kieran insisted that Rachel and Lily take the tent, while he slept under the stars with his saddle for a pillow. Rachel was too exhausted to argue. The day's events had drained her completely, and the moment her head touched the folded blanket serving as a pillow, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning came, with the gentle murmur of the creek and bird song in the cottonwoods. Rachel emerged from the tent to find Kieran already awake, tending a small fire over which a pot of coffee was brewing. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Coffee's almost ready. Not much for breakfast, I'm afraid. Just some hardtack." "That's fine," Rachel said, stretching. "I need to get back to town anyway. Keep looking for work." Kieran nodded, pouring her a cup of coffee. "About that," he said, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "I might have a proposition for you." Rachel accepted the cup warily. "What kind of proposition?" "A job, of sorts." Kieran sat down across from her. "I've been traveling a while, and I'm heading back to my ranch in northern Arizona. It's a small spread, but it's mine. I could use some help around the place cooking, keeping things in order. The cabin's not much, but it's solid. You and Lily would have a roof over your heads. Regular meals." Rachel stared at him, disbelief etched on her features. "You're offering me a job? As what, your housekeeper?" "For now," Kieran said with a slight nod. "I'll pay fair wages, provide for you both. It's honest work, Mrs. Lawson." "Why would you do this? You don't know me. I could be anyone." "You're a mother with a child and no place to go," Kieran said simply. "And I'm a man with a ranch that needs tending, and no one to help me do it. Seems like an arrangement that could benefit us both." Rachel studied his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but found only earnestness. Still, the proposal was outlandish to leave with a man she'd just met, to travel to his remote ranch with no guarantee of safety or security beyond his word. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Quinn, but I can't possibly—" "Think on it," Kieran interrupted gently. "I'm in town for 3 more days. After that, I head north. The offer stands until then." Rachel nodded, though she was certain her answer wouldn't change. She finished her coffee in silence, then gathered Lily and her carpet bag to head back into town. "I'll walk you," Kieran offered, and Rachel didn't refuse. The companionable silence between them as they made their way back to Copper Canyon was oddly comforting. In town, Kieran tipped his hat in farewell. "I'll be at the livery if you need anything, or here, same time tomorrow morning, if you'd like to join me for breakfast again." "Thank you for everything, Mr. Quinn," Rachel said sincerely. "Truly." As Kieran walked away, Rachel turned her attention back to the task at hand, finding work. Today, She expanded her search to include the smaller establishments, the laundry, the bathhouse, even the tobacconist. Each encounter ended the same way: sympathetic refusals or offers of a free meal out of pity, but no work. By late afternoon, desperation had begun to set in. Rachel sat on the steps of the church, Lily fussing in her arms, when the door behind her opened. "Mrs. Lawson?" a gentle voice inquired. Rachel turned to find an elderly woman with kind eyes standing in the doorway. "Yes? I'm Mrs. Harding, the pastor's wife. Would you like to come inside for some tea? It's cooler in there." Too tired to refuse, Rachel followed Mrs. Harding into the small church and through to the adjoining parsonage. The kitchen was modest but spotlessly clean, and the aroma of baking bread filled the air. "Pastor mentioned you were looking for work," Mrs. Harding said, as she set a cup of tea before Rachel. "Said you'd been all over town today." "Word travels fast," Rachel murmured, cradling the warm cup in her hands. "It's a small town," Mrs. Harding acknowledged with a small smile. "Your husband—" "Gone," Rachel said flatly. "Left for a card game in Tucson. Won't be coming back." Mrs. Harding's face softened with understanding. "I'm sorry to hear that, dear. Gambling's taken many a good man from his family." Rachel bit back the retort that Thomas had stopped being a good man long ago. Instead, she sipped her tea and allowed Mrs. Harding to coo over Lily. "The church has a small fund for emergencies," Mrs. Harding said after a while. "Not much, but enough to put you and the little one up at the boarding house for a few nights while you figure things out." The offer of charity stung, but Rachel couldn't afford pride. "That's very kind," she said softly. "Pastor can speak to Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house. She's a good Christian woman. Won't charge full price, I expect." And so, as evening fell, Rachel found herself installed in a tiny room at the back of Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, with strict instructions to be quiet after 9 o'clock and to keep Lily from disturbing the other boarders. The room was clean but sparse: a narrow bed, a washstand, a chair, and little else. After settling Lily down for the night, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. Thomas was gone, her home was gone, and now she was living on church charity, with no prospects for the future. Unbidden, Kieran Quinn's face came to mind, his earnest offer, the kindness in his storm blue eyes. Could she truly consider his proposal? To journey to a remote ranch with a man she barely knew? It seemed ludicrous, and yet, what were her alternatives? The church fund would run out. Mrs. Wilson's charity would wear thin. Without work, Rachel would eventually be forced to move on, perhaps to Tucson, or even further afield, with no guarantee of finding anything better there. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams populated by faceless card players and endless dusty roads leading nowhere. The next morning, after a sparse breakfast provided by Mrs. Wilson, Rachel found herself walking almost unconsciously toward the creek where Kieran had made his camp. She told herself she was simply going to thank him again for his kindness, perhaps to ask if he'd heard anything more about Thomas at the saloon. Kieran was crouched by the fire when she arrived, stirring something in a small pot. He looked up at her approach, his expression brightening. "Mrs. Lawson," he greeted, standing. "Wasn't sure you'd come." "I wanted to thank you again," Rachel said, adjusting Lily on her hip, "for your help yesterday." "No thanks needed. Found a place to stay, I see." "The church is paying for a room at the boarding house, for a few days at least." Kieran nodded, gesturing for her to sit on one of the logs he had arranged as seating. "And after that?" Rachel sighed. "I don't know. There's no work to be had in Copper Canyon, it seems." "My offer stands," Kieran said quietly. "No pressure, just, it's there if you want it." Rachel studied him carefully. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Quinn?" "The truth, please." Kieran seemed to consider his words carefully. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he said finally. "Fever took her. We were just starting out, had the ranch less than a year. Since then I've been wandering, I suppose, taking jobs delivering horses, working cattle drives, anything to keep from going back to an empty cabin." He stared into the fire, his expression distant. "But it's time I went home. The ranch is good land. Could be something real, with some care." He looked up at her. "I'm not looking for a wife, Mrs. Lawson. That's not what this is. just someone to help make the place livable again, to bring some life back to it, and you need a safe place for you and your daughter. Simple as that. His honesty disarmed her. There was pain in his eyes when he spoke of his wife, but no deception that Rachel could detect. "I'll think about it," she said, surprised to find that she meant it. They shared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush, sweetened with a little molasses, and Rachel found herself relaxing in Kieran's company. He was easy to talk to, a good listener, and he seemed genuinely enchanted by Lily, who had taken to grabbing at his hat whenever he came close. "She's a spirited one," Kieran laughed as Lily once again made a successful grab for his hat brim. "She is that," Rachel agreed with a smile. "Gets it from her. From me, I suppose." Kieran's expression sobered. "Your husband? He ever hurt you? Besides leaving, I mean." The question caught Rachel off guard. "Not physically, if that's what you're asking." Kieran nodded, seeming relieved. "Good. That's good." They lapsed into silence for a moment, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and Lily's contented babbling. "I should head back to town," Rachel said eventually. "Mrs. Wilson wanted me to help with some mending." "Of course." Kieran rose to his feet. "I'm at the livery most of the day if you need anything. Or here in the evenings." Rachel nodded, gathering Lily and her few things. As she turned to go, Kieran spoke again. "Mrs. Lawson? Rachel?" It was the first time he'd used her given name. "I'm not saying I'm a better man than your husband. Got plenty of faults of my own. But I can promise you this. I'd never leave a woman and child alone with nothing. That's not who I am." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet certainty, stayed with Rachel throughout the day as she helped Mrs. Wilson with household chores in exchange for her room and board. It echoed in her mind as she fed Lily that evening and as she lay awake in the narrow boarding house bed, staring at the ceiling and weighing her options. By morning, she'd made her decision. Kieran was saddling his horse near the livery when she found him, Lily balanced on one hip and her carpet bag in her free hand. "Mr. Quinn!" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. He turned at the sound, his expression cautiously hopeful as he took in her appearance. "Mrs. Lawson, I've been thinking about your offer," Rachel said, drawing closer. "I'd like to accept on one condition." "Name it." "I work for fair wages, as you said. I cook, clean, help with whatever needs doing around the ranch. But I remain free to leave whenever I choose, with no obligations beyond the work agreed upon." Kieran's face broke into a genuine smile. "That's more than fair. I'll draw up a proper agreement if you like. Put it all in writing." "A handshake will do," Rachel said, extending her hand. Kieran took it, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "Deal," he said simply. They left Copper Canyon the next morning, Rachel and Lily traveling in a small wagon Kieran had purchased, loaded with supplies for the ranch. Kieran rode alongside on his stallion, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories of his travels. The journey north would take nearly 2 weeks, Kieran had explained. They would follow established trails where possible, camping each night by water sources he knew well from his travels. Rachel had expected to feel more apprehension about the journey, about the decision she'd made, but instead found herself experiencing a curious sense of freedom. Thomas had constrained her life in ways she hadn't fully realized until now, limiting her interactions with others, controlling their finances, making all decisions without consultation. By contrast, Kieran treated her as a partner in their journey, asking her preferences for campsites, deferring to her judgment about when to stop for Lily's needs, and sharing the responsibilities of setting up and breaking down camp each day. On their 3rd night on the trail, as they sat by the fire, after a simple dinner of beans and biscuits, Rachel found herself studying Kieran's profile in the flickering light. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, and strong hands that moved with surprising gentleness when he helped with Lily. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Kieran's expression brightened. "It's in a valley near the Mogollon Rim. Good water, good grass. The cabin needs work. It's been sitting empty too long, but it's solid. 2 rooms, with a lean-to. I was converting to a proper kitchen when—" He trailed off, the shadow of his loss passing briefly across his features. "Anyway, there's plenty of game in the hills, and I've got a small herd of cattle. though they've probably gone half wild by now. The nearest town is about a day's ride, place called Pine Springs. Not much to it, but they've got a general store, a smithy. As he spoke, Rachel could picture the place remote, but with potential. A place where Lily could grow up with space to run, with clean air and fresh food. A far cry from the dusty, cramped cabin in Copper Canyon, where Thomas had kept them isolated and dependent. "It sounds lovely," she said honestly. "It is," Kieran agreed, his voice soft with affection for his home. "Or it could be, with some care." The days on the trail fell into a rhythm. They would rise with the sun, break their fast on coffee and whatever remained from the previous night's dinner, then travel until midday, when they would stop to rest the horses and let Lily stretch and play. Then onward until late afternoon, when they would make camp near water, Kieran hunting or fishing for their dinner when supplies allowed. Rachel found herself growing stronger, more confident. The initial awkwardness between them faded, replaced by an easy companionship. Kieran was unfailingly respectful of her space and privacy, always sleeping a discreet distance from her and Lily, yet quick to offer assistance when needed. It was on the 10th day of their journey that disaster struck. They had been following a narrow trail through pine-forested hills when a sudden summer storm descended upon them. The rain came in blinding sheets, and a crack of thunder spooked the horse, pulling Rachel's wagon. The animal reared, then bolted, taking the wagon careening down the trail. Rachel clutched Lily to her chest with one arm, while desperately trying to control the panicked horse with the other. She could hear Kieran shouting behind her, the sound of hoofbeats as he gave chase. But the roar of the storm and the rattle of the wagon drowned out his words. The wagon hit a rut in the trail and tilted wildly to one side. Rachel felt herself being thrown, had just enough presence of mind to curl protectively around Lily as they both tumbled from the wagon seat. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding in her shoulder, but managed to keep Lily from the worst of the impact. "Rachel!" Kieran's voice cut through the din of the storm. He was beside her in an instant, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "Rachel, Lily, are you hurt?" Rachel sat up carefully, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. Lily was wailing, more frightened than hurt, from what Rachel could see. "I think we're all right," she managed, though her voice shook. "My shoulder." "Let me see," Kieran said, his hands gentle as they examined her. "Not dislocated, I don't think, but you'll have a hell of a bruise." His eyes, intense with concern, searched her face. "Anything else? Your head?" "No, I'm fine, just shaken." She looked down at Lily, who was still crying, but seemed unhurt. "We were lucky." Kieran's relief was palpable. He helped Rachel to her feet, one arm supporting her as she swayed slightly. "The wagon's a loss," he said grimly, nodding toward where it lay on its side further down the trail, one wheel completely shattered. "But we're not far from a place I know. Old line cabin belonging to a friend. We can shelter there until the storm passes. Figure things out." The line cabin was little more than a one-room shack, but it was dry and relatively clean, with a small fireplace and basic furnishings, a table, a chair, and a narrow bed with a straw mattress. Kieran had managed to retrieve their most essential supplies from the wagon, and he set about building a fire while Rachel tended to Lily. "You take the bed," he said once the fire was crackling cheerfully. "I'll make do on the floor." Rachel, exhausted and aching from the accident, didn't argue. Once Lily was settled beside her on the bed, Rachel found her own eyes growing heavy, lulled by the steady rhythm of the rain on the cabin roof and the warmth of the fire. She woke some hours later to find the cabin dark, save for the glow of embers in the fireplace. Lily slept soundly beside her, but there was no sign of Kieran. A momentary panic seized her before she heard the soft creak of the cabin's small porch and realized he must be outside. Carefully, so as not to wake Lily, Rachel slipped from the bed and made her way to the door. Kieran sat on the rough-hewn step, staring out at the night. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and the sky brilliant with stars. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly, settling beside him. Kieran shook his head. "Too much thinking to do." "About the wagon?" "Among other things." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We're still 2-3 days from the ranch. Without the wagon, it complicates things. My horse can carry double for a while, but not with all our supplies, and not with Lily. What are our options? Pine Springs is closer than the ranch, maybe a day's hard ride. We could head there, see about getting another wagon, or at least a pack horse. He hesitated. Or there's a small settlement about half a day south of here. You and Lily could stay there while I go ahead to the ranch. Come back with proper transport. The suggestion of separating, even temporarily, sent an unexpected pang through Rachel. She'd grown accustomed to Kieran's steady presence, his quiet strength. "I don't want to separate," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her tone. Kieran looked at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. No, we'll figure it out together. Pine Springs seems the better option." He nodded slowly. "All right, we'll head out at first light." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. Rachel was acutely aware of Kieran beside her, of the narrow space between them on the step. "I've been thinking," Kieran said eventually, his voice low, "about what you said back in Copper Canyon, about your husband." Rachel tensed slightly. Thomas seemed a distant memory now, a chapter of her life that was firmly closed, yet the wound of his betrayal was still fresh. "What about him?" she asked cautiously. "You said he didn't hurt you physically, but he hurt you in other ways." It wasn't a question, but Rachel answered anyway. "Yes, he was controlling. Everything had to be his way. He gambled away whatever money I managed to earn, kept us isolated. By the end, I hardly recognized the man I'd married." Kieran's hand found hers in the darkness, a gentle touch that she could have easily pulled away from, but didn't. "I want you to know," he said slowly, "that's not how it would be at the ranch. You'd have your own money, your own say in things. Lily would have a good life. And if someday you decided you wanted to move on, I'd help you do that. Set you up proper somewhere, make sure you had what you needed." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to Rachel's eyes. "Why are you so kind to us?" she whispered. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. "Because when Emily, my wife, died, I was lost. Wandered for years, taking whatever jobs came my way, never staying anywhere long. It was no way to live. Meeting you and Lily, it reminded me that there's more to life than just getting through each day. That having purpose, having someone to care for, it matters." His hand tightened slightly around hers. "I'm not saying I expect anything from you beyond what we've agreed. Just that you've already brought something back to my life that I thought was gone for good. A sense of direction, maybe. Hope." Rachel's heart beat a rapid tattoo against her ribs. In the short time she'd known Kieran, he'd shown her more genuine care and respect than Thomas had in the years of marriage. And despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance, she found herself drawn to this quiet, honorable man who asked for so little yet offered so much. "I feel it too," she admitted softly. "This sense that maybe, just maybe, things could be different, better." Kieran's profile in the starlight was still, controlled, but she felt the slight tremor in his hand that belied his calm exterior. "Rachel," he began, but whatever he meant to say was interrupted by a small cry from inside the cabin. Lily was awake. The moment broke, and Rachel withdrew her hand gently from his. "I should go to her," she said, rising to her feet. Kieran nodded. "Of course." As Rachel tended to Lily inside the small cabin, her mind whirled with unspoken possibilities. There had been something in Kieran's voice, in the touch of his hand, that suggested his feelings might be evolving beyond their practical arrangement. And, if she were honest with herself, her own feelings were increasingly complicated as well. Morning brought practical concerns back to the forefront. They packed what they could salvage onto Kieran's horse, with Lily secured to Rachel's chest in a sling made from a shawl. The plan was for Rachel and Lily to ride while Kieran walked alongside, leading the horse. "It'll slow us down," Kieran admitted as he helped Rachel into the saddle, "but we should still reach Pine Springs by nightfall tomorrow." The journey was indeed slower than their previous pace, but not unpleasant. Kieran walked with a long, easy stride that ate up the miles, and the forest trail was beautiful, dappled with sunlight and fragrant with pine. They stopped frequently to rest and to allow Kieran to scout the path ahead, ensuring it was safe for the heavily burdened horse. During one such rest, as they sat beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak, Rachel found herself studying Kieran's face as he played with Lily, who had taken to him completely and now greeted him with wide smiles and grabbing hands whenever he came near. "You're good with her," Rachel observed. Kieran looked up, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "She makes it easy? Smart little thing, isn't she?" "She is," Rachel agreed, pride warming her voice. "Thomas never spent much time with her. Said babies weren't interesting until they could talk." Kieran's expression darkened momentarily. "His loss," he said simply, tickling Lily under her chin and eliciting a delighted gurgle. They reached Pine Springs late the following afternoon, a settlement somewhat larger than Copper Canyon, but still modest by any standard. The main street boasted a general store, a smithy, a small hotel, and various other businesses, all arranged around a central square. Kieran led them directly to the livery, where the stablemaster, a burly man named Hargrove, greeted him with evident surprise. "Quinn, thought you'd lit out for good this time." "Not quite," Kieran replied with a grin, helping Rachel dismount before introducing her as Mrs. Lawson, my new housekeeper. If Hargrove found this arrangement unusual, he gave no sign of it. "Wagon through a wheel?" he asked, eyeing their loaded horse. "Worse. Storm spooked the horse, took the whole thing down a ravine. Need to outfit us with something sturdy enough to get to the ranch." As the men discussed options, Rachel took the opportunity to explore the small town with Lily. The general store was well stocked, and the proprietor's wife, a friendly woman named Mrs. Collins, was immediately taken with Lily. "Beautiful child," she cooed, offering Lily a small wooden toy from behind the counter. "You're new to these parts?" "Just passing through," Rachel explained. "On our way to Mr. Quinn's ranch." Mrs. Collins' eyebrows rose slightly. "Kieran Quinn's place, up near Blackwater Creek? Heard he'd abandoned it years back." "He's returning now. I'll be working as his housekeeper." Something in Mrs. Collins' expression shifted, a knowing look that made Rachel flush slightly. "I see," the older woman said. "Well, it's good Kieran's finally coming home. That place has been empty too long, and he's a good man, though he's had his share of troubles." By evening, arrangements had been made. Hargrove had a small but sturdy wagon he was willing to sell for a reasonable price, and Kieran had purchased a steady mare to pull it. They would stay the night at the small hotel and depart for the ranch at first light. The hotel room was modest but clean, with a double bed that Rachel would share with Lily. Kieran, true to form, had taken a separate room down the hall. After settling Lily for the night, Rachel found herself restless, unable to sleep despite her fatigue. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Kieran standing there, looking somewhat hesitant. "Everything all right?" she asked, concerned. "Fine," he assured her. "Just wanted to make sure you and Lily were settled in comfortably." "We are, thank you." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Would you like to come in for a moment? Lily's already asleep." Kieran entered the room, his tall frame making the space seem suddenly smaller. He stood somewhat awkwardly, hat in hands, until Rachel gestured for him to take the room's single chair while she perched on the edge of the bed. "We should reach the ranch by tomorrow evening," he said, his voice low to avoid waking Lily. "It's about a day's journey from here, assuming the weather holds." "I'm looking forward to seeing it," Rachel said honestly. Kieran nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It needs work, like I said. Been empty too long, but the land is good and the cabin solid." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by Lily's soft breathing. Rachel found herself thinking about their conversation outside the line cabin, about the unspoken possibilities that had hovered in the air between them. "Kieran," she began, surprising herself with the use of his given name, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for us, not just the practical help, but for treating us with such respect. It means more than I can say." His eyes, warm and steady, met hers. "You don't need to thank me for treating you like a human being deserving of respect, Rachel." "Perhaps not, but after Thomas, it feels remarkable." She took a deep breath. "I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever this arrangement between us becomes, I'm grateful for the chance you've given us." Kieran's expression softened. The gratitude goes both ways. Having you and Lily along, it's made returning home feel like something to look forward to, rather than something to dread. He rose then, placing his hat back on his head. "We should both get some rest. Long day tomorrow." Rachel nodded, walking him to the door. Before he left, Kieran hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek gently with one calloused finger. "Sleep well, Rachel," he said softly, then was gone. Rachel closed the door behind him, her cheek tingling from his touch. She returned to the bed, curling herself around Lily's small form, and fell asleep with a curious lightness in her heart. The journey to Kieran's ranch the next day took them through increasingly rugged but beautiful terrain. Pine forests gave way to open meadows dotted with wildflowers, and distant mountains rose blue and majestic against the horizon. By late afternoon, they crested a small rise, and Kieran reined in his horse, gesturing to the valley below. "There it is," he said, a mix of pride and trepidation in his voice. "Home." Rachel followed his gaze to where a small cabin nestled among trees near a winding creek. Even from this distance, she could see that the place had been neglected. The corral fence was broken in places, and what had probably once been a vegetable garden was now overgrown with weeds. But she could also see the beauty of the setting, the rich pasture land, the clear creek, the protective embrace of the surrounding hills. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "It needs work," Kieran acknowledged, "but we'll get it right." The "we" hung in the air between them, full of promise. They made their way down to the cabin, Kieran growing visibly tenser as they approached. It must be difficult for him, Rachel thought, returning to a place so filled with memories of his late wife. The cabin itself was larger than Rachel had expected, 2 main rooms, with a lean-to addition that Kieran had mentioned was intended to be a kitchen. The main room had a large stone fireplace, a table with benches, and various shelves and cupboards. A thick layer of dust covered everything, and there were signs that mice had made themselves at home in their owner's absence. But the structure itself was sound, the roof intact. "It's a good home," Rachel said, bouncing Lily on her hip as she explored the space. "With some cleaning and a few repairs, it will be comfortable." Kieran visibly relaxed at her approval. "I'll get a fire going, bring in our things. There's a root cellar out back with some preserved goods that should still be good, and I'll hunt something fresh for dinner." They worked together for the remainder of the day, Kieran bringing in firewood and their supplies while Rachel swept away years of dust and cobwebs, set up a makeshift bed for herself and Lily in the second room, and inventoried what remained in the cabin's cupboards. By nightfall, they had made significant progress. The main room was clean, a fire crackled cheerfully in the fireplace, and a stew made from dried beans, preserved vegetables from the root cellar, and a rabbit Kieran had caught was simmering in a pot. After dinner, with Lily asleep on a pallet near the fire, Kieran and Rachel sat at the table, mugs of coffee before them. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the satisfaction of a hard day's work and the promise of more to come. "Tomorrow I'll check on the cattle," Kieran said, breaking the silence. "See how many are left, what condition they're in. And there's a chicken coop that needs rebuilding. Used to keep a dozen hens before. Before your wife died," Rachel finished gently when he trailed off. Kieran nodded, his expression distant. "Emily loved this place. She was the one who convinced me to buy it, to settle down. She had big plans, fruit trees, a proper garden, maybe even a dairy cow." His smile was tinged with sadness. "She was always looking ahead, always seeing the potential in things. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was." Kieran's eyes met Rachel's across the table. "She would have liked you, I think." The simple statement touched Rachel deeply. "I would have liked to know her," she said honestly. Kieran reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Thank you," he said simply, "for bringing life back to this place, for giving me a reason to come home." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Under their combined efforts, the ranch slowly transformed. Kieran repaired fences, rounded up the scattered cattle, rebuilt the chicken coop, and acquired a new flock of hens. Rachel cleaned and organized the cabin, planted a kitchen garden, and established routines that brought order and comfort to their lives. They settled into a companionable partnership, each respecting the other's domain while offering assistance when needed. Rachel found herself thriving in this new life, enjoying the freedom to make decisions, to create a home according to her own vision rather than someone else's demands. Lily, now nearly a year old and taking her first tentative steps, blossomed in the open air and loving attention. As for Kieran, Rachel watched him gradually shed the restlessness that had marked him when they first met. He seemed to grow more rooted, more present with each passing day. His smiles came more frequently, his laughter more easily, particularly when playing with Lily, who adored him completely and had begun attempting to say his name, producing something that sounded like "key in." The nature of their relationship remained ostensibly professional. Rachel was still, technically, Kieran's housekeeper, and he was scrupulous about paying her the agreed-upon wages and respecting her privacy and autonomy. But there was an undeniable closeness growing between them, a deepening connection that went beyond their practical arrangement. It manifested in small ways. Kieran lingering at the breakfast table to tell her stories of his travels. Rachel saving the most interesting news from her occasional trips to Pine Springs to share with him over dinner. The way they would often sit together on the porch after Lily was asleep, watching the stars and talking about everything and nothing. One evening in late autumn, as the first chill of the approaching winter crept into the air, they sat thus on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold. Kieran had just returned from a 3-day trip to a neighboring ranch to help with a cattle drive, and Rachel had found herself missing his presence with an intensity that surprised her. "Pine Springs was buzzing with gossip when I went for supplies yesterday," Rachel said, sipping from a mug of hot cider. "Seems the Collins' daughter is engaged to the blacksmith's apprentice. Young Miller, good for them. He's a hard worker, that boy. Mrs. Collins invited us to the wedding. It's to be held at Christmas." Kieran glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "Us?" Rachel felt her cheeks warm, grateful for the dim light that hid her blush. "Yes, well, she assumes, that is, people in town seem to think, that we're more than employer and housekeeper," Kieran finished for her, his voice careful, neutral. "Yes." Rachel stared into her mug, suddenly uncertain. "I didn't correct her. I should have, perhaps, but—" "But?" Kieran prompted gently when she trailed off. Rachel took a deep breath. Over the past months, her feelings for Kieran had evolved from gratitude and respect to something deeper, warmer. She had tried to ignore it, to remind herself of her disastrous marriage to Thomas, of the risks of depending on a man again. But Kieran had proved himself different in every way that mattered, reliable, honest, respectful of her independence. "But sometimes I wonder if they might be right," she said finally, raising her eyes to meet his. "If we might be becoming something more than our arrangement suggests." Kieran was very still, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Rachel felt a flutter of panic. Had she misread the situation entirely? Had she jeopardized the safe, comfortable life they had built? Then Kieran reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "I've been wanting to talk to you about that," he said, his voice low and earnest. "For a while now, actually, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to presume, or to make you uncomfortable." "You could never make me uncomfortable, Kieran." He smiled at that, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Rachel, these past months with you and Lily, they've been the happiest I've known since Emily died, maybe even before. You've brought life and purpose back to this place, back to me, and I find myself thinking more and more about the future, our future, together, if that's something you might want." Rachel's heart seemed to swell within her chest. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I've fallen in love with you, Rachel Lawson," Kieran said simply. "And with Lily, too. I'm saying I want us to be a family, properly, if you'll have me." Tears sprang to Rachel's eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy. "I've fallen in love with you, too," she whispered. "I've been fighting it, telling myself it was too soon, that I should be more cautious after Thomas. But you're nothing like him. You're everything I never knew I needed." Kieran's hand tightened around hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "No rush, no pressure. We can take our time, court properly if that's what you want. I just needed you to know how I feel, where I stand." Rachel smiled through her tears. "I think we're well past the courtship stage, don't you? We've been living together for months, raising Lily together. We know each other's habits, good and bad. What would be the point of pretending otherwise?" Kieran's laugh was low and warm. "You have a point there." He hesitated, then asked, "So, what are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying yes," Rachel said simply. Yes to being a family. Yes to a future together. Yes to everything. Kieran moved then, closing the distance between them and cupping her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. In answer, Rachel leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Kieran's arms slid around her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless, smiling. "I love you," Kieran whispered against her hair. "And I love you," Rachel replied, feeling as though her heart might burst with happiness. They were married 2 weeks later, in the small church in Pine Springs, with Lily, now steady on her feet, toddling down the aisle ahead of them, scattering wildflower petals. Mrs. Collins had insisted on hosting a small reception at her home afterward, and the whole town turned out to celebrate. It was, Rachel thought, as she danced in her new husband's arms, everything a wedding should be: joyful, communal, a true celebration of love and new beginnings. That night, after returning to the ranch their home and putting Lily to bed, Kieran took Rachel's hand and led her to the porch where a small package awaited her. "A wedding gift," he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I've been working on it in secret for weeks." Rachel unwrapped the package to find a beautifully carved wooden sign. "Quinn Family Ranch," it read, with their names Kieran, Rachel, and Lily carved beneath in elegant script. "It's perfect," she whispered, tracing the letters with her fingertips. "There's room to add more names," Kieran said softly, "if someday we decide to expand our family." Rachel's heart swelled at the thought. "I'd like that," she said, leaning into his embrace. "Very much." 1 year to the day after Thomas had abandoned Rachel and Lily for the lure of the card tables in Tucson, Rachel stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Kieran played with Lily in the yard. At 18 months, Lily was a bundle of energy, her laughter ringing out as Kieran swung her in gentle circles. So much had changed in a year. The abandoned, dusty cabin had become a true home, warm and inviting. The ranch was thriving, with a growing herd of cattle, productive fields, a vegetable garden that was the envy of the region, and plans for an orchard come spring. And Rachel herself had transformed from a desperate, abandoned wife to a confident, beloved partner in all things. Kieran looked up, catching her eye, and smiled that warm, genuine smile that never failed to make her heart skip a beat. He set Lily down gently and walked toward the porch, his movements easy and relaxed. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just reflecting on how much has changed in a year," Rachel answered, leaning into his side as his arm slipped around her waist. "How different our lives are now. Better different, I hope." There was a hint of vulnerability in his voice that touched her deeply. "The best kind of different," she assured him, turning in his arms to face him. "I never imagined I could be this happy, this complete." Kieran's eyes darkened with emotion. "Nor did I," he said softly. "After Emily died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd never find love again, never have a family. You and Lily proved me wrong. You gave me back something I thought was lost forever. And you gave us a home, safety, love," Rachel countered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him gently. "We rescued each other, I think." As if on cue, Lily toddled over to them, arms raised in the universal signal to be picked up. Kieran scooped her up effortlessly, settling her on his hip where she immediately began playing with the buttons on his shirt. "Papa," she said clearly, patting his cheek with a small hand. Kieran's eyes widened in surprise. It was the first time Lily had called him that. He looked to Rachel, who was beaming through sudden tears. Is that all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That she calls me that?" "More than all right," Rachel assured him, wrapping her arms around both of them. "It's perfect. You are her father in every way that matters." "And you're my family," Kieran said, his free arm pulling her closer. "Both of you, the best luck I ever had." As the sun set over the Quinn family ranch, painting the sky in the hues of gold and crimson, Rachel thought of that day in Copper Canyon, of Kieran's words that had changed the course of her life. "You'll have better luck with me?" He had been right, in ways neither of them could have imagined then. Better luck indeed, not the fleeting, fickle luck of the card table that had lured Thomas away, but the deep, abiding fortune of finding true love where and when it was least expected. In Kieran's arms, with Lily between them, Rachel knew she had found her home. Her heart, her future. Whatever challenges life might bring, they would face them together. A family forged not by chance, but by choice, by love, and by the courage to believe in second chances. "I love you," she whispered, the words simple but profound in their truth. "And I love you," Kieran replied, his voice a promise. "Always." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the three of them stood together on the porch of their home, a family complete. Rachel's heart was full to bursting with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey that had begun with loss and desperation, but had led, through twists and turns neither could have predicted, to this, a love as vast as the Arizona sky, as enduring as the mountains that cradled their valley, as real and solid as the ground beneath their feet. Better luck indeed.